Good morning. We are broadcasting this morning from the sanctuary of the Reynolds Memorial Baptist Church in Sperryville, Virginia. This church congregation was founded in 1787, and this church, with a handful of other Southern Baptist churches here in Virginia, are called Pioneer Virginia Baptist Churches. Today's message for the Testify message online, and also for the continuation of the quarantine series of sermons, is called Back to the Future, because that's what we're going to do. On the frontier, my great-great-grandfather was a Methodist circuit rider in Virginia. So long ago, it was before she became the state of West Virginia, where he sojourned. And this is very similar to a Bible that he carried on horseback during his rounds as a circuit-riding Methodist minister for more than a decade, way out in the wilds of the American frontier, the Western Reserve at the time. I brought it along because I wanted you to see what life was like for an ancestor who was always in the back of my mind growing up. You see, even though I'm from a good Methodist family, we did not attend church with any frequency when I was growing up. So I grew up unchurched. But that didn't keep me from always remembering that I had a grandmother on my father's side who nearly married a Methodist minister, and that her granddaddy, one of the favorites in her life, was this minister, this preacher on horseback, way back in history. So one of the things that a Methodist circuit rider did way back in history was he kept a daily diary. This is about the size of one of those little Gideon pocket Bibles, and inside this pocket diary of 1854, which really chronicles his time in Sutton, Virginia, from 1853 to 1853 to 1854, has his little daily entries. Now there are 4 entries on these 2 pages, as he took just a little bit of time to talk about how well he was doing, what family with whom he was staying, and he probably would ride at least 6 miles between households out on the frontier to minister to those in the western part of the great Commonwealth of Virginia, way back in 1853 and 54. He had already been on the circuit for several years at that point. The point I want to make today is that although I was unchurched until adulthood, I was called to ministry when I was 40 years old. And I was called to ministry because I believe God did not want to skip a generation. I believe that he wanted my generation, one of 5 children, to continue to share in some effective manner the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ. It's interesting that over the years, having researched much of my great-great-grandfather's life, I once was in a parade on horseback, portraying myself as some Methodist circuit rider. But the dangers and the difficulties that these men faced warranted that many of them died of privation and of exposure long before they ever had an opportunity to marry. And when they did marry, that usually took them off the circuit anyway, as marriage was kind of death to the ministry of a circuit rider, at least if he was out on the frontier. Now, my great-great-grandfather's diary of 1853-54 is chronicled then in this book called The Long and Winding Road of the Methodist Circuit Rider, where we have taken his actual reports and we took them back to Sutton, Virginia a number of years ago and shared them with the Historical Society there, and they were quite pleased to see them. The point I want to make here today is that we need to get back to the future. Right now we're in quarantine, or we're just coming out of the quarantine because of the COVID virus, but we're also seeing a lot of unrest in our cities. I want you to know that I don't believe we're seeing anything quite like my great-great-grandfather saw, because he was in the midst of a terrible civil war, pitting North and South against one another. We were sorely divided then, and in some ways we're sorely divided now. But it doesn't have to be that way if we get back to the future. The one thing that I have discovered as a pastor now for 26 years, I've discovered that there's an opportunity to find the answers to the great questions of our lives, no matter what those questions are. Now, in my generation, the answers during the 1960s would have been in song lyrics like, "The answer, my friend, is blowing in the wind." No, it's not. The answer is not blowing in the wind. The answer is written in the Word of the living God. I have discovered this as I've studied this over all these years, and prior to that of ministry, reading through the Bible during the course of a year on several occasions. What I want you to know is that even though we see some strife in America right now, and we're not sure quite how to deal with it, the best way is to pray and to be part of the progress of getting back to the future, back to the Bible, back to the Word, back to the person of Jesus Christ, who wrote or said in a sermon, a great Sermon on the Mount, "Blessed are the peacemakers. Blessed are the peacemakers." And so in that tradition, in the tradition of Christianity, we beg you to get back to your roots, back to your future, and realize that our churches are going to reopen. We're going to be singing those powerful hymns again, but are we going to be taking to heart the words and the ways and the will of the living God? That is the question for today as we get back to the future. Amen.